Hi, I'm Justin Moorman.
And I'm Katie Thornton, and this is the Re-Education of Schools podcast,
where we have open, honest conversations about how to better understand social-emotional learning, trauma-informed care, the whys behind student behavior, and how to help kids navigate it all as they go through school and life. All right, welcome back to our next episode, Run Around, Art of Listening. Before we get started, if you're enjoying the podcast, as always, man, we would really appreciate you leaving a review, giving us a 5-star review would be preferable on whatever platform you listen to.
Don't put the effort in if you're doing something else.
Yeah, if you just want to leave a 1-star review.
Just why?
Why are you even listening to this point? But it helps other people find this content and helps keep the conversation going, so we'd really appreciate that. So, all right, Run Around, the art of listening. Katie, why are we doing this episode? The art of listening. We're jumping right in.
I love how you punted it to me.
Yeah.
Well, because you told me we were going to.
Because I told you that I thought it was important.
No, this is good. I really think when you think of like what trauma-informed care is, it's really listening. And we're going to talk about what that actually means. But really building people that build culture and climate holistically are really good listeners. Yeah. Or are committed to improving the skill. And I think this is the heart of what makes trauma-informed care a success, when you're willing to listening to yourself, listening to your body, listening to each other, all those things. Listening is at the core and a hard skill.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so many people don't feel like they're listened to. So even forget about the educational side of things for, a minute. Mm-hmm. People in your life out there that everybody who's listening right now, people in your life, a lot of those people in your life probably don't feel like they're really listened to very often at all. And that's like a really lonely feeling, but it's also kind of a demeaning feeling, right? It seems like you're a little bit less than if you feel like you're never being listened to. And you might be thinking yourself, like, I'm actually one of those people that's not listened to. Like, there are times in I think all of our lives where we feel that way. So I think that's why this is an important episode. And education is obviously a people business, so we need to be really good at listening to people. And I think even more than that, you think back, we're working with kids, or you're an administrator, you're working with a lot of adults, and we just need to be good at listening. It needs to be a skill that we're developing and making ourselves better in, I think, overall. Ultimately, we're going to give credit where credit's due, because we are going to reference this, I'm sure, more than once, and her more than once, and I've already referenced her once in a couple episodes ago. But this is kind of started with a podcast that Emily P. Freeman did. She's an author and a podcaster. Podcast is called The Next Right Thing. She did an episode talking about listening. She's done many episodes. Obviously, she's got like 300 plus episodes. But one of the episodes was on listening. And, we're not going to pull everything like word for word from her episode. There's stuff that we're going to pull from that. And I thought it was important that we say that, not pretend like we just came up with all this stuff.
Let's link it. We'll link it when we promote this podcast. It's an easy, short listen.
Yeah, real quick.
It's like 11, 12 minutes.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's a good one.
Perfect.
That's a good one. So that's kind of where this one all came from, is this idea of listening. Again, just the immense importance of it. Katie and I talk about this a lot just in our day-to-day jobs, whether it's listening to staff, whether it's listening to colleagues, whether it's listening to the kids, how much of a difference that makes, and what makes people good and or not good at it is something that we talk about a lot. Yeah. Comes up just a lot.
I can't tell you how many times we text each other and like, have you talked to, or can you go talk to? And I don't think either one of us mean talk to. We mean, is one of us available to go listen to this person, because they need to feel heard right now.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about what that actually means. So,
yeah. All right. Well, let's kind of delve into that then. So talk about maybe a little bit of definitions, or of maybe areas of focus with listening, hearing, being heard, being a listener. So what does it mean? What does listening really mean? What did you find?
It's the act of paying attention to sounds.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you took it a real literal way. I took it a little bit different. Okay. So I would say, I don't know why that caught me off guard. That was funny. Yep. So that is what listening is. I think part of this is semantics too, right? I think ultimately people will interchange hearing, listening, right? Mm-hmm. And so sometimes there's that hard line between, like, I hear something, like I hear a sound, right? I think for me, listening was always going beyond that, beyond just hearing a person, like, oh, I heard you say this. which is actually something I say a lot, but that's, I hear you. I say that a lot to students. But instead it kind of delves into the realm of like really trying to understand what the person, or in your case, the sounds that came out of a person's mouth, what those sounds mean. What's the meaning behind them? So that's kind of where I landed with like the listening part of it. So talk about like the importance or what it is to be heard. What does it mean to be being heard?
The feeling that one's communication is received with attention, empathy, respect, and the spirit of mutual understanding.
Okay.
You like that one better?
I don't know. I think it was good. I think it was also good. So I'm pulling this from absolutely nowhere.
Okay.
This is just what I thought of. So if this is the exact opposite of what you said, then so be it. But being heard, like I think in my experience, is as important as someone being seen. Right. So if I'm being heard by somebody, it's as if I'm being seen by them, and not just seen with their eyes, but like seen, understood, I exist. And I think being heard is that equivalent too, right? It lets somebody know that in a world where you may feel like super insignificant or unimportant, like I see you, I hear you, and like you actually matter. You matter enough for me to take the time to not just try to coexist, but to actually like know and understand like you as a person, not even just your current situation, but like you as a being. Like I'm trying to understand that. And I think if somebody's really hearing me, really listening to me, like I think that's what that conveys, right? Like I matter enough. And I think that's really important for people to feel like they're being heard. Like if you think about it like that, it's really important. And I think and we'll get to this here in a minute, but I think when you start thinking about like the different kinds of people we interact with in education specifically, whether it's colleagues, whether it's students, whether it's parents, you have all these people that it's important that they are seen, that they are heard, that they are attempted to be understood as a person. And that's really what all of us are looking for overall.
Shameless plug for a book study that our staff did. It was Heard, Seen, Valued.
Yeah.
It was just kind of like the same idea educationally, but it goes through MTSS. Anyways, great book.
Yeah.
Kind of goes through the same idea process.
Yeah. All right. What about being a listener?
I'm going to go ahead and list some of the qualities that Emily P. Freeman had outlined in her podcast, because I thought she had some
good ones.
Yep. She had some good qualities in there. So this one actually, I'm going to list some of hers. Actually, I'm going to do that in a different spot. This one's I was looking up online, qualities of a good listener.
Oh, okay.
So this is for somewhere else, sorry. That you're here and now, that you're being present. Distractions don't stand a chance, that you're there. You're curious about what someone's saying. You're sincere and open. Sense of good reception. You ask the right questions. Accept others' opinions and dial back your own. Don't interrupt. Stay authentic and know your limits in a conversation. Know when to turn it over. I thought this last point was good from the article that I read. Know when you at some point cannot be the person that needs to listen, that they need professional listening.
Ooh, yeah.
I think sometimes we take on things that maybe we are not qualified to take on, that we really need to pass that on to a trained professional.
Yeah.
So those were just some points that I thought were good about. That's what they would acknowledge as being a good listener, or having the qualities of a good listener.
Which I know you talked about that last one. Are there any other from that list that particularly stuck out to you?
I think Emily Freeman's going to talk about it too when we get into there. But I think really being present when you talk to somebody, I think we're going to talk about it in a little bit. But I have had to be super mindful of being like, I love to hear about that more. Can we schedule a time to talk about that? Sometimes I always feel obligated, especially in the job I have, that I have to listen to everybody all the time right now. And I have gotten really so much better at being like, that sounds really important to you. What's a good time we can talk about that?
Yeah.
That like right now is not a good time. I'm not going to give you my attention. I'm not going to care what you're saying. So being really mindful of being present and setting up time where you're intentional about your listening.
Yeah. I heard a story one time. This wasn't during this, and I don't know, I'll probably mess the story up even, but it's stuck with me. I heard this forever ago. I may have even been in college when I heard this, but it was about this professor who, whenever he was talking to anybody, whoever he was talking to, he was very popular. A lot of people wanted to come talk to him all the time. But when he was already in a conversation with somebody, if other people frequently would come up and want to say hi or things like that, and how he like remained focused on the person that was talking and like would have other people like wait until he finished whatever interaction he was already in, and how much of an impact that made on people. And I've always apparently kept that in my mind somewhere. Not that I'm saying I do a great job of that, but that's always been a thing that I like remember of how that's an important thing to do. Like, and I think maybe more than anything, it struck me how that mattered to people. Like it really mattered that he did that and made them feel a certain way, right?
Can I share that's one of my pet peeves is that I hate when I'm in obviously not just like a quick social conversation with somebody where it's an open conversation, I would say.
Yeah, sure.
I hate when I
right?
am in an intentional conversation with somebody that clearly is a closed conversation.
Yeah.
And somebody comes and stands right next to or like is waiting for me to stop talking to acknowledge the
Just
fact
right
that
in there.
I just social pragmatics. It drives me nuts.
What if you waited
or just
else?
say, hey, she's busy right now. I'm not going to talk to her right now.
Yeah, clearly.
You lingering behind me does not. Anyways, pet peeve.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
I get that. All right. Well, for me, I was thinking I had no list, but this is really being a listener is really about being relational, right? Which is a buzzword in trauma-informed care right now too. And honestly, we've found I think can really make people mad sometimes because people use it as kind of a cop-out when they don't know how to help somebody, and they be like, well, have you tried building a relationship with that kid? And that fires people up immediately. But like that's a whole different conversation for a different time. So being a listener is about being relational, and being relational means being empathetic ultimately, which is really the crux of trauma-informed care, is this idea of having an empathetic disposition, I guess, towards people. So it doesn't mean that I have to agree, doesn't mean that I have to give you your way in our world as education, right? Sometimes we can think like, well, I'm going to hear this kid out, and somehow that means that like I'm giving in or that they have to get what they want. Doesn't mean that I'm not right even. I may even be right while I'm hearing you say whatever thing you're saying. But that doesn't mean I can't empathetically listen to what you're saying as well. It does mean, though, that I actually care about the person right in front of me deeply enough that I seek to understand who they are, see them again, for the person that they actually are. And that's really what people want ultimately, right? They want to be seen and understood. It's less about even getting their way or being right or things like that. I think those things can be distractions too as well, but I think that's an important thing. I was thinking about a kid as a good example. There's a kid that I have that always wants to take stuff with him all over the place, right? He wants to take stuff down to the classroom, wants to take stuff out to recess, he wants to take whatever. So I'm telling this kid no, like all the time. Nicely, but I'll be like, hey, we're actually not taking that. And he'll be like, well, what about this? And I'm like, well, we're not taking that either. And he's like, what about this? And I'm like, what? So I've started asking him, like, well, why do you want to take that out? I'm like, why do you want to take that wherever? And he'll explain it, and I'll sit there and listen to his whole story that is nonsensical, about why he wants to take whatever it is, wherever he wants to take it. And then we get to the end of all that, and I say, yeah, it makes sense. It sounds like it's really important to you. We are going to leave it in here, though. Like, that is still what we're going to do. Yeah. And the difference between that and just no, you need to go to wherever. Like, that's a huge difference. And I get that you can't do that necessarily every single time in every single situation. But that's a huge difference in that kid's life. It's a huge difference for that kid. Like, he accepts it way more when I've heard him out. Yeah. Listened, been like, man, that seems like a big deal. Still what I said is going to be the case, though. We're still not going to take it wherever. I think that's like an easy example of like why listening is important and how it makes people feel, even though they're not maybe getting their way when we're talking about students. So I thought that was kind of a pertinent example overall of how that works just in my day-to-day life really right now still in school. All right. So how can we become better and more intentional about being good listeners?
I think it talks
lots
about
of things.
Yeah.
Right?
I just put timing. I think I've already kind of addressed that. Just really setting up intentional time where I give their undivided attention. When I'm regulated and present, like in a good mindset to receive a conversation from somebody, even if it's not like that heavy, but just making sure I'm not going to be quick to say something back. I think asking the intention of the conversation, and I love that people will, like on our staff are so great and be like, I don't need you to fix this because I'm such a fixer by nature. Yeah. I just want you to hear me. I just want to get this off my chest. I just want to say this, and you don't need to do anything other than listen. So I love that people are so good about laying the groundwork of the intention of the conversation because they know I'll try to fix it. So I need to think about that more. But I think, what do you need from me? And then, is there anybody else who needs to be part of this conversation that we're about to have, or you want to share? Is this, just between you and I, so we don't have to rehash it multiple times? The response. This is the part from Emily P. Freeman that she actually had in her podcast, but her idea is the medical term, which is do no harm.
Yeah.
It's how can you do no harm and make space for that? So her 5 things that conversation responses that she recommends using, which I will say, Justin, you're a very good listener and you do this all the time. I've heard you say all these. So tell me more. What was that like for you? That sounds, and then give a descriptive word in which that sounds scary. That sounds difficult. That seemed really hard.
Yeah.
What do you wish would have happened? I think that's really good, especially if you're in administrative leadership. Asking somebody, how did you want that to turn out? Because people will come and complain or say things, but then I think we never get to the part of like, oh, that turned out different than how you expected it. What was your desired outcome for that?
I also think sometimes people don't know. Like, that's a good question, because then sometimes people realize they
I
don't know
know
how they wanted it to turn out instead. And they're like, oh, well, I just wasn't happy with what it was for whatever reason. Could have been a totally valid reason. But I also didn't know what I wanted to have happen. And so there's not necessarily a solution there, right? Because you're like, oh, and that, I think that's a good thing to spur people on to think a little bit more.
Yep. And this is my favorite, and I've gotten much better about using this one. Thank you for sharing that with me. That was a really big deal. Thanks for sharing that with me and just holding space for it. Then I also think the other part is the follow-up from listening. So if you really have heard somebody, go back and check in. How are you? To do that, and then give what is needed. So if there was a desired outcome from your listening part, to make sure that make sure they felt heard, that you follow up on whatever was needed on the other end, and then keep confidentiality with conversations.
Yeah, those are good. I think sometimes we don't even really realize this is not an answer to this question right now, but I think a lot of times we don't realize how completely our jobs as educators are really communication based, and how a ton of communication, good communication, a ton of it has to do with just listening, right? And so I think that's we make it about a lot of other things, and it obviously is, right? If you're not making any lesson plans, then that's not great. Like, as an educator, if you're never teaching something, that's not great. Like, if you're never, I get all those things, but really, so much of it is like, how am I communicating with this room of X number of kids, X number of middle schoolers, X number of high schoolers throughout the day? How am I communicating, and how am I making sure that I'm being a good listener when I see, hundreds of kids a day or over 100 kids a day? How am I making sure that I am a good listener and I'm picking out the people that really need to be listened to on any given day? When we're in elementary school and it's departmentalized and I'm seeing 3 different classes throughout the course of a morning, I just don't think we think a lot about that. I think we just assume. I think a lot of people don't think a lot about communication in their day-to-day lives, and I think we just assume that we're good at it, or that it doesn't even cross our minds. Maybe we don't think about it at all, and I think that's why it's important. To me, that's why this was such an important episode, to be like, hey, actually, this is a big deal. Like, it's a really significant thing and changes so much if you can be a good communicator. And again, I think most of being a good communicator is being a good listener too. So I don't know. That was like a random aside, but I think there's so much that goes into the communication side of things and the listening side of things that makes our job actually work.
Yeah, I would say 98% of the problems I deal with all stem from communication. I didn't feel like I was told that, whether it's family, kids, whatever. I didn't really understand the clear expectations.
Yeah.
Conflicts with colleagues. I thought it was just a communication issue. Families to teachers. Again, it's the way we communicated. Bigger district things, right? It's communication. So I think most of what the heart of all of it is all communication. People feel like they've been listened to, or there's good communication, then there seems to be very little issues or problems.
Yeah, I think trying to think back on like the times that I've had conflict with even students, right? And so many times it comes down to the fact that like I assumed that I knew what they were saying, and then I realized later I did not understand what they were saying. And I try to be in those moments, try to be really good about saying like, listen, I'm like, that's my fault. I thought you were saying this, and like really you were saying this thing. So here's what we can do based off of whatever. And usually, again, in my world, that's usually somebody being pretty upset that I'm working with. But I think that it just makes a big difference. But I think that's people in general. All right, so how can we become better and more intentional about this? Again, I think one of the things that always sticks out to me about listening is studying, and anything that we're trying to get better at is studying and practicing it, right?
Yeah.
Like if you don't actually look into how to be a better listener and what practices you can put in place, then you're not going to be a better listener. Like you can't just be like, well, I'm just going to decide to be a better listener. And you can try, but like, and that's not bad. I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do, but you like, clearly we can research stuff. You can listen to a 12-minute podcast episode and learn some quick tips. There are all kinds of books about being good communicators, good listeners, things like that. Like you can go and actually make yourself better at this. But you have to take the time to decide to do it and figure out what that means, and then practice it, because you can read about it, you can listen to the podcast, but if you don't decide, hey, I know I'm gonna go have a conversation about what we're gonna do for dinner tonight at home, and when we're in this conversation, I'm gonna try to practice saying some of these questions that somebody laid out that were good questions to ask. Part of this is because if you don't practice things and you don't prepare yourself ahead of time. And one of the things from Emily P. Freeman's podcast that she talked about, so many times the really important conversations come up unexpectedly.
Yeah.
Right? They're not when we've sat around and prepared for it. They are out of nowhere. They catch you off guard. And the only way you can react in good, strong ways, right? If you want to relate it to sports, it's just like that. You can't just assume like, okay, like bases loaded, game 7 of the World Series, game's on the line. Like I've never thought about this situation before or practiced hitting. Like,
yeah.
What? Like, well, that's a terrible spot to put yourself in. Like you have to be prepared for it. And so when you're all of a sudden hit with one of those conversations, it is crazy important that you have been prepared ahead of time and that you can almost rote from memory, like rote memory kind of thing. Like you can just muscle memory react to how you do no harm in those kind of moments and how you can actually get more information and help somebody be heard, which is super important.
Yeah, I would say very intentional. Like I'm pretty quick to be tempered when I feel like someone talks to me a certain way.
Yeah.
And I have to be really intentional of like holding space. And I've gotten better at it the last couple of years, but still not perfect. But to really hold space and listen and not respond in a harmful way.
Yeah, and you have to practice that, right? That comes with practice, and that comes with intentionality of practice in different settings, not just while you're at work, not just with the students in your class or with the staff that works under you or anything like that. You have to really be on top of that. Yeah, obviously, I talked about like the 5 things that Emily P. Freeman had laid out in her podcast as well, which are great. I think the one that was interesting that I also pulled, another great book if you're looking, and I reference it probably too many times, but is Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference. Really is a book. It's supposed to be a book about negotiating. It really is a book about communication and how to gain information from other people, not like in a devious way, but like that's just good relationship practice. How do I get more information from somebody? And there are several of Emily's lists that are also things that are talked about in his book. But I think one of them is that labeling that is like the third thing she said, where it says like, oh, that sounds tough. That sound, it must be really, it seems like you're really sad. It seems like you're really, upset about this. And it's so convenient and so helpful because all that does then is either now the person's confirming, yes, like that is how I feel. And you're like, okay, we're on the same page. Or they're saying, oh, no, like I'm not upset. I was really excited. And then all of a sudden you got new information. Right now I have different new information to work with. Okay, like I'm not working with somebody that's upset. I'm working with somebody that was really excited. I'm not working with somebody that's really mad. I was working with somebody who's really anxious and worried. And those are two different things, right?
Yeah.
Two different states of being. And so you can't do that though if you're just too worried about trying to solve it, or you're just too worried about saying your side of whatever, or things like that. And then the other one that's a really quick tip from Chris Voss that he uses a lot, and that is unbelievably effective, like wildly effective, is like as somebody's talking, is kind of repeating the same 3 words back to them, only like a question, like 2 or 3, 3 to 5, something like that, words of what they just said. So like a good example. It's hard to explain, I think, without an example. So a good example might be like, like some staff member walks up to you, right? Oh, that staff meeting was really annoying to me. And you might say, instead of being like, well, maybe you can plan the next staff meeting, instead of whatever thing, yours would probably be much more intense than what I just came up with, Katie.
Yeah.
But when they say that, so, hey, that staff meeting was really annoying to me, you might actually just say, really annoying to you? And then just stay quiet. And the quiet part's the hardest part, right? But what you find is if you do that, people want to fill the space, like naturally. Everybody does this. I talked about this years ago in a different kind of training thing. And it was funny, as I explained it, somebody started doing it to me. I didn't realize they were doing it. Like, because they started doing it. And that's how effective it is if you just repeat like the last 3 words back. Or like for a kid might say like, oh, I'm going to punch Josh the next time I see him. Right? And instead of jumping straight to being like, well, no, you won't. And like, this is what you're going to do. Like, and because you have no information. This kid just walks in there mad. I'm going to punch Josh the next time I see him. You might just say something like punch Josh and then be quiet. And they're going to tell you why they're going to punch Josh, or they're going to tell you like more information. And then as they tell you stuff, you can also say things like, well, it sounds like you're really upset. And then you can just be quiet. And they're going to say, I am really upset. Or they're going to be like, no, I'm not upset. It really hurt my feelings. Like they'll give you more information. It's those simple things that gather more and more. And the more you practice them, the easier they become to do, the more like just natural they become to say and to do. And you get so much information that way. And then you're able to ultimately help a situation. And somebody feels like they're being heard. Right? There's something about that repetitive mirroring, that we know now actually helps people feel as if they are being heard and adds to the connection between two people. And that gives us the chance to help regulate somebody who is dysregulated as well.
And one of the most important things, the pre-teaching part of all this, is spending time for kids to understand their feelings and emotions.
Oh, sure.
That the way through interoception and understanding their bodies and how they're feeling and what those feelings actually are, and lots of good tools and resources out there for kids to kind of correctly identify that, so they are able to give you a good answer back. Yeah.
All right. And then the point of all of this, I guess, is that a lot of us struggle to listen because we get so stuck trying to respond, right, or solve or share, because we feel like that's what we're supposed to do, but people are actually really wanting to accept a lot of hard things and accept things that aren't going well if they feel like they are being heard. I think, again, it gives value to you as a person, right, in this situation. All right, so what impacts does this have with the relationships around us?
Okay, I'm going to just start with colleagues, and you just want to chime in as we go down the list?
Yep, let's do it.
Okay, we talk a lot about culture and clarity, and a major part of this is listening. We have to create the safe space. I think that's the biggest part. Someone feels safe and a place for people that they can provide feedback. And that means even for leaders that are able to receive and really hear what the staff's saying. So, I
didn't say anything much different than that. I think that it does create a safe space, right? And it creates stronger teams too. If a whole team feels like they're being heard amongst each other, that builds a really strong team and builds a lot of trust.
Yeah. I think creating that space to let people talk. For parents, so important. I mean, I think you say this, and I love it. Like we're joining their team for a year, right? Yeah. Beyond thinking about the staff, parents often feel alone, judged, and misunderstood. And if we don't give time for them to truly listen and hold time and space for them to hear their experience, they're never going to trust us because they've already had most likely trust broken in the school system. Yeah. They'll never trust us to share information that can actually help and support their children, and we can in return help and support the family. Yeah. So that takes a lot of intentional listening without judgment. Yeah. Yeah. Your answer is even better than what mine was. Yeah. I like that one. Because it builds that empathetic kind of relationship, but they are in a spot where they are feeling judged by schools a lot, not because of anything anybody's done necessarily wrong at schools either. It's just, that's a natural thing to feel like other people assume I'm this kind of parent, or
I'm doing something wrong or whatever, because parenting is incredibly personal,
Yeah.
right? And so it's hard to not feel that way. I was recently reading like a thing that my mom wrote. I won't get into it. It's going to be too long of the thing. But anyway, I was reading something that my mom wrote, and she was talking about like all of her years of being a school secretary.
Yeah.
She was an elementary school secretary for years and years and years. And one of the things that she wrote, she was talking about how being a good listener on her part, she felt like that helped so many parents along the way, because she was the first line, right? As school secretaries are, a call comes in, somebody's firing mad, right? About something. They are hot about something. And you're the one hearing it, right? As a school secretary first. And she just talked about how many times she was able to help parents feel better about situations, and ultimately not necessarily even quote unquote solve a problem, but how she was able to make it to where the next person in line didn't even have to deal with this issue. Like the principal didn't have to deal with it. The classroom teacher didn't have to deal with it, because she was willing to hear this person out. And by the end of it, when she was like, okay, well, what would you like me to do now? And they're like, well, that's actually it. I just wanted somebody to know whatever. And then it was done. And how many times she did that teachers and principals probably never even knew about an issue that was, that somebody was mad about something that they had decided to do, because she heard them out and it never got beyond that point. And what a valuable thing that is, right? Yeah. And so for parents, it is such a big deal for us to have that initial, like, I'm willing to hear you. I'm willing to listen to you. I don't have to defend myself. I don't have to tell you why you're wrong and I'm right. Anything like that. I just need to hear you out, and how that solves so many issues.
Yeah, I think the sign of a good school secretary, they're like the hub of the school.
They are.
They know it all.
Yeah.
They are the culture and climate and the glue and the space and the mother hen of the school building. And
big
what
deal.
exceptional
big
listeners.
Position.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, students.
I think this is the one that often gets overlooked because of a power dominance or authority type work. This ultimately is the work of Dr. Ross Green, that collaborative restorative practices. So you look at both models, collaborative problem solving and the restorative practice model. They're both about listening to kids.
Yes.
We skip that. We think we assume we're in charge. We make misconceptions. We make plans for kids. We never involve them. We don't listen to them. When kids feel heard and they are part of the process, and you feel like you're meeting their needs, a lot of your behavior issues will dissipate, or it'll be so much easier to resolve them much faster, because they feel like they'll take the time. And how many kids do you have that get upset and said, well, I'm just going to go talk to this teacher because they'll listen to me. They know who will listen to them.
Yes.
And that is huge.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Yeah, this is the biggest one, right? It's the students. So students of all ages just really have to feel like what they say matters, and a lot of them don't feel that way right now. I think it's such a big deal. I mean, it's a big deal at all ages, and I can think about it being a big deal at all ages right now, but I just keep thinking like high school is such a big deal, right? As a high school teacher, to be in a spot where you can make students feel like they're being heard and that you're somebody that'll listen to them. I'm sure middle school and elementary school are equally as important, but yeah, it's just something that is on my mind right now for whatever reason. What an incredible gift, though, to offer a student, to let them know that they as a person matter more than just the content that you are teaching, right? And again, I'm never saying that like you can just sit around and listen to kids all day and just chat and you don't teach anything. Like that's obviously not the point, but I am saying that you can sit and talk and listen to a student that really needs it in a moment, right? And we better also start getting good about seeking out the ones that we can see need to be listened to and offer our time to them. And we better be ready when those moments come up. Like we were saying, like if you're not ready, if you haven't practiced, if you haven't learned about being a better listener, you're going to be in a spot where you don't know what to do. You're going to feel like you don't know what to do. And we are solvers. Teachers are solvers by nature, and we don't have to solve the problem. A lot of times we just need to be there and we just need to listen and be a really good listener to the students.
Yeah, I didn't write down this quote, but there's something like first seek to understand before... I forget. Somebody's going to...
No, it sounded like it was going to be great.
It was going to be great. But basically the idea is first understand what someone is saying, to understand this before you seek to respond.
Yeah.
seek to understand before you respond or something like that. But anyways, that is kind of like the whole idea. And I have to be so super intentional about that, just my personality type.
Yeah.
To like stop and pause and really listen to what someone needs. And I'm not always great at it. My husband would agree that I'm not always great at it, that I just stop and be intentional.
Let's bring him in real quick and find out what he... No,
well, sure. You know, lots to say.
All right. So, hey, not everybody, like you're saying, not everybody is naturally great at being a listener. So how do we work with others who do not possess these skills?
We get rid of them real fast. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah.
Jeez. I was like, all right.
No, it's frustrating. It's super frustrating. That's a frustrating person to work with for sure.
Yeah.
But you have to understand everyone's working and growing, and some people are better at it than other. It's a skill that I've had to develop. I'm not naturally good at it. I think, Justin, you're just naturally good at it, personality type wise.
Maybe. Yeah.
Very good listener. But I think this is the really hard part. I think timing is crucial. So I think setting up some time and to let them know I have something that is important I need to talk to you about. When's a good time that we can talk about that? If they're not intentionally good about listening, nothing worse when you go to talk to somebody and they're still working on their computer and not making eye contact with you, and you're like, dude, I'm talking, you just don't even care and you're not listening. So like if I have something important to tell that person, hey, I need to talk to you. Can we set up some time to make that happen, and be intentional about that? Make it about you and what you need or what your kids need, and ask how they might be able to support that. Do not accuse or demand things from people. I think people get on the defensive right away.
Yeah.
Ask their opinion, their feelings, their insights of the situation that you're asking about. Acknowledge their time and feeling. Thanks for spending the time talking with me. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your insight. That's helped me kind of help solve this problem better. If you're talking about a colleague, even with kids too, I think that goes the same for kids or parents. I think this sets up the scenario for a lot of things. Acknowledge their time and feelings, and then even if you don't agree, you still have to compromise because they have to feel valued. And the part that heard, seen, value piece, you do have to compromise some way that it's not you going to ultimately sell them to get them to do what you want them to do. There has to be a little compromise so they know you've heard them. And this will add leverage to the relationship. And I'd put just be intentional about those micro interactions moving forward, because that's ultimately what's going to build a sense of safety and trust between somebody for them wanting to open up and share more with you.
Yeah. That's good. I personally, I just think that a lot of people don't possess these skills. So if you're good at it, you're probably in the minority, I believe. I'm not saying everybody's like terrible listeners, but I don't think a lot of people give a lot of thought to it and don't put a lot of time and practice doing it. And I think societally, where we're at with technology and everything else, there are a lot of reasons why we're good at saying stuff, but we're not great at listening to stuff. So, people notice things, I think, that they admire in others or that makes a difference in others. And often try to imitate it. So I think be a good empathetic listener, even if someone else is not the same to you, and ultimately believe that that's gonna make a difference and start making a shift at some point. I think that's important, is that you always still want to be somebody that's good at this. Doesn't mean you have to sit around and just constantly put yourself in a spot where you're listening to somebody that doesn't listen to you back ever. But I think it is important to realize that, what you do matters and makes a difference in other people's lives, even if it's not reciprocated all the time.
Yeah. I would say probably your closest relationships, probably one of the key things you would say about people that you were the closest with, they are good listeners.
Yeah.
They listen to you. They care.
Yeah.
And I would say you would not say, this is one of my best friends. They never listen to me.
Yeah.
If that's the case, it's probably not who you need to be hanging out with. Reevaluate that time you're spending there.
That's right. All right. What do you want people to walk away knowing from this episode?
I would say listening's not easy. We talk about, like, as a kindergarten teacher, we tell kids, okay, now you need to listen. You need to listen. So that's a really hard skill that we're developing, that we have to intentionally teach and model and practice and all those things in front of small children. And it's not an easily developed skill. But you have to be purpose and mindful, and then we continue to improve. And it's something I personally have to be very intentional about working on. That you don't have to fix everything when you're here. To listening does not mean fixing.
Yeah.
So I've had to break those two things apart and separate them. And then sometimes people just need our presence. We say this all the time, that co-regulation, that we're really all just being human together, and just sitting and listening to somebody and saying nothing is the best co-regulation strategy that we can have for kids. And really that's how we get kids regulated and behavior reformed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, especially in intense situations that we can find ourselves in with kids, if you're looking at, like, I'm going to look at, I guess, closing it out, thinking about that with students, when there's a more intense kind of behavioral whatever with a student, get really good at slowing down. And I think it's hard to do, but get really good at slowing down and not feeling like you have to say something back right away. It's difficult, but get good at slowing yourself down. In education, I said it just a few minutes ago, we're problem solvers. Slow down and kind of lean into the reality that silence and stillness and just being with somebody to listen is not only okay, but actually immeasurably more powerful than just telling them what you think the solution is to what they're saying or that what they have to do. That silence with others is okay, and being in that spot with them is okay. And so that's part of being a really good listener.
I was thinking, we've taken some road trips lately, and the sign of a good friendship or a relationship or a family structure when you can sit in silence and it being comfortable where you don't feel like you have to fill the air or the dead space. Like just being okay with being around and present and not having to say a whole lot.
Yeah.
So it's good.
Well, we appreciate you guys joining in with us as always and listening to us. Hopefully you feel like that was a helpful episode to listen to. If you know somebody who's a terrible listener, maybe send this episode their way in a not so low-key attempt to make them a better listener, or just listen to it as a staff meeting, something like that. Practice it though. I'd encourage, if you do ever listen to this and like are doing it as a staff meeting, do some things that practice using these questions that Emily P. Freeman had. Practice some of the Chris Voss things. Practice doing those in conversations. It's silly. It can be silly, but the more you practice it, the better off you're going to be. And I think that's important. So we appreciate that. I'm going to end it with a quote that you have highlighted on your sheet. I stole your sheet to end it.
Okay, go for it.
I thought it was a good one. Emily P. Freeman, at the end of her episode, she used a quote from David Augsburger, I'm going to say. Okay. And he said, being listened to is so close to being loved that most people cannot tell the difference.
That's good.
Really great. Hey, let's go out there and do the work.
Let's go do it.